The tale of the Brazilian Serra Pelada would have been more typical of the period depicted, for one example, by Jack London, when the protagonist Smoke Bellew turns out to be one of the most successful gold miners in all of North America. In some other words, to believe that such a scenario is possible in the 20th century, and more so in its second half, is not only difficult, but impossible. But it is a fact. Serra Pelada, which stands for Naked Mountain in Portuguese, has become the largest open gold mine in the world, as well as the worst place in the world in terms of crime and working conditions. Let us today tell you a story about the insanities of Serra Pelada in Brazil. You're now watching Flip Side of History. Welcome. History behind the discovery. The Portuguese had long been openly jealous of the Spanish, whose colonies were much more rich in precious minerals and gold after they discovered Brazil. In Brazil, such wealth was not found at all. But 200 years later, at the end of the 17th and beginning of the 18th centuries, a local wanderer who still remains unknown decided to drink some water in the stream of Tripui, which is located in the state of Minas Gerais. The man found small yellow gemstones at the bottom, which turned out to be gold pieces. From that exact moment on, there was a gold boom in Brazil. During the 18th century, almost half of all of the gold mined in the world came from Brazilian mining operations. A total of more than 400 mines operated on the territory of the country, but things have a way of coming to an end. So did gold in Minas Gerais. So by the middle of the 20th century, all the mines were abandoned, overgrown, and few people remembered them. The new mine. Towards the end of the 80s of the last century, gold prices around the world began to rise, and the growth was quite serious. The precious metal was becoming more and more deficient. And then, as if by order, in early 1979, Genésio Ferreira da Silva, simple and unknown Brazilian farmer, found a gold bar of 6 grams in a small river that flowed on his property. It meant a lot. The man immediately invited a geologist who conducted a study and determined that the site was a real gold mine. Now, the story of the gold rush itself has 2 versions. The first is that Brazil learned about the new deposit after the geologist's report. The second is that the farmer himself took the gold bar to town and sold it to one of the local jewelers. The rumor that gold had been discovered again spread throughout the entire country in just a matter of days. And at once, all those who dreamed of getting rich streamed to the new mine. Thus began the most incredible modern gold rush of its magnitude. Madness for gold. Approximately 5 weeks after the discovery of the gold mineral, at least 10,000 so-called official gold miners were working at Naked Mountain, and at least 12,000 so-called quick money hunters, who were not working in the mines themselves, but further afield, also dreaming of finding their own gold mine. These lone strivers were nicknamed garimpeiros in Brazil. All gold-bearing land was finally sold by the beginning of the year 1980. A total of about 4,000 people purchased the land. Each became the owner of an average of 9 squares of land, which, in theory, was supposed to have made the owner richer. During the prime of the mining period, by the way, the volume of gold production in Brazil increased tenfold, reaching 37 tons of precious metal. In fact, gold mining itself began in May of 1980, when the last piece of land was sold. From that moment, the process of digging began. And we must say that it was really creepy and even horrible. By some estimates, about 100,000 people were working in the field at one single period of time. The owners of the land, as a general rule, did not take part in digging the land themselves, hiring workers. These workers would go down into the open pit and select the soil, loading it into their sacks. The road to the mine location itself was about 10 miles long. There was no transport, so the miners got there only using foot. All of these sections were extremely close to each other, so the land was only excavated by digging deep into the ground. The boundaries between neighboring areas, or more precisely the pits, were often separated by thin walls of earth, so weak that these exact walls collapsed, burying the unsuccessful miners alive. However, that didn't stop anybody. As the sack was filled with soil, the digger carried it on his back to the top. The weight of the sack was not insignificant, up to 50 kilograms, and it took quite a long climb, 400 meters. The ladders that the miners used to get out of the pit were called goodbye mummy ladders. These letters were either unreliable ropes or flimsy wooden constructions. No one thought about the safety of workers in the first place, so the mortality rate at the mine exceeded any possible limits. After the worker finally lifted the sack to the top, the earth was carefully sifted and washed in the presence of the owner or landowner. If gold was found, as a rule, the worker received a bonus. He could take out 1 sack of earth for himself. But the rates were quite brutal. 20 to 30 cents or less were paid for 1 sack lifted. On average, a worker could be paid about $3 a day. It's without the bonus sack. As the photographer Salgado, whose pictures gave the whole world a glimpse of the new Brazilian gold rush, later wrote about the workers. Down there, they could find wealth and freedom. Their life was a continuous series of going down the mine and coming up with the sack of earth, and the hope that there would be gold. In addition to the rather dangerous conditions of digging and the equally dangerous transport routes to the top, the workers were constantly threatened by mudslides. How many people died under unexpected mudflows and slips of the undermined earth have not been established to this very day. To be truthful, nobody bothered to establish it. If one of the miners found a gold piece, he or she would warn the others by firing a shot upwards. This meant that somebody was really lucky, but this luck often ended up with just one single finding. Everything for the workers. Small villages as well as settlements grew like mushrooms around the mining site, where miners could at least have a little rest and relaxation. It is fully natural that the prices in such places were as for the rich, and the list of services was from the word whatever you desire. It is obvious that thousands of girls worked in these camps as prostitutes, accepting only gold as payment for their services, starting in their teenage years. There were all kinds of criminal gangs that could simply make the lucky guy who found the treasure disappear or be found murdered. On average, there were up to 80 murders a month within a mining district. There were attacks on the miners by thugs, and clashes between the miners themselves should be also taken into account, and clashes between gold diggers and criminal gangs. No one was investigating because it was simply unrealistic to do so when only 100,000 workers, not including representatives of other professions, had gathered on a fairly small piece of land. The nearby town of Marabá became the center of pubs, drinking establishments, casinos, and brothels. And as earlier mentioned, the prices were simply extraordinary. For example, the most popular type of liquor was distillate made from sugarcane, but in Marabá it cost as much as a 20-year-old whiskey. 3 months after the start of mining, the mines were taken over by the Brazilian Regular Army. This slightly reduced the crime rate, but had no effect on the working conditions of the workers and miners. By the way, since the introduction of army control, state control of gold was also implemented. In the area of the mines, there were shops that bought up the metal at a price that was 70% of the price of gold on the London Gold Exchange. The sale of gold outside government agencies was officially forbidden, but according to some estimates, almost 90% of all the precious metal mined at Serra Pelada was sold on the black market. All in all, about 45 tons of gold were officially mined during the operation of the site, while unofficial estimates are at least 500 tons. Whether this is in true terms cannot be identified. The end of fever. Nevertheless, even the state's need for gold mining could not overweigh many other factors. By 1985, the number of court cases related to crimes in the mines, smuggling and other matters was already exceeding all imaginable limits. Also, the lack of normal working and living conditions, which led to a great death toll, prompted the Brazilian government to shut down mining activity. All the more so as the pit experienced more and more frequent mudslides that buried more and more workers underneath. In the same year, the mine was officially closed, but some unofficially continued mining until a flood in 1986 put a final end to the history of the mine. It turned into a large lake with thousands of small muddy lakes around it. Tens of thousands of workers became jobless again after the closing and flooding of the mine. As for those who made their fortunes in the literal and figurative sense of the word, it is not appropriate, and no one will speak of those who have become rich. The previously mentioned Salgado wrote about that period. Every single hair on my body stood on its end. The whole history of mankind unfolded before my eyes. They were slaves to their own dream about gold. Thank you for watching our episode. Do not hesitate to subscribe, leave a like, and apart from that, expect more videos on Flip Side of History channel.